Caleb didn't return to his rented room. Holding Mrs. Vance's thin folder, he felt it was more like a prepared script than a historical record. He needed the raw truth, the kind not embellished by family tragedy or crocodile tears. He walked toward the hill with the abandoned sanatorium, hoping to find Mr. Lawrence there. And he was in luck. Mr. Lawrence was tending to a bougainvillea hedge near the dirt path, his familiar pruning shears in hand. Seeing Caleb, he looked up, his usual gentle smile gone, replaced by a look of concern. "You don't look well at all, son," Mr. Lawrence said bluntly. "You're as pale as a ghost. Sylvan Crest doesn't agree with you." "I think I'm in trouble, Mr. Lawrence," Caleb said, his voice weary. "Trouble related to this place?" He nodded toward the sanatorium. Mr. Lawrence sighed, setting down his shears. "I warned you. Don't go poking around in old business." "I don't have a choice anymore," Caleb said, showing the old man Julian's patient file. "I found this inside. And I think I've done something very foolish." Mr. Lawrence squinted at the yellowed script. When he read the names Julian and Alara Rydal, his hand trembled slightly. He returned the file to Caleb, his gaze no longer just concerned, but grave. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice low. Caleb took a breath and told him everything. He told him about the music box, the locked melody, and how he had opened it. He told him about the laughter, the darkness, the ice-cold hand, and the handprint on the window. He held nothing back. He was too tired to hide anything. Throughout Caleb's story, Mr. Lawrence just listened silently, his expression growing more and more somber. When Caleb finished, the old man sat down on a rock by the roadside and pulled a pack of cigarettes and an old lighter from his pocket. He lit one, took a deep drag, and exhaled a cloud of white smoke. "Mrs. Vance lied to you," he finally said. "Or she told you a very small part of the truth, the part she wanted you to believe. The story of Julian isn't a romantic tragedy. It's a horror story." Mr. Lawrence stared into the distance, his eyes looking back into a faraway past. "I was just a young lad back then, used to go up here with my father to deliver vegetables to the sanatorium kitchen. I saw them, the mother and son. Mrs. Rydal wasn't an ordinary mother. She was a shaman, one who knew the ancient magic of the ethnic minorities in these highlands. They said she could talk to spirits, drive out demons." "Then why did she bring her son here?" Caleb asked. "Then why did she bring her son here?" Caleb asked. "Because she had failed," Mr. Lawrence replied, his voice filled with sorrow. "The boy, Julian. He wasn't sick in the usual sense. He was born different. Rumor was that while she was pregnant with him, Mrs. Rydal accidentally entered a sacred forest, offending some power. The child was born beautiful and intelligent, but as he grew, strange things began to happen. He could talk to things no one else saw, move objects without touching them. At first, it was harmless, but then it turned cruel. He caused village pets to die, orchestrated small accidents. The tipping point was when he gave a neighbor an angry look, and that person fell ill and died for no clear reason." Caleb swallowed hard. The evil he had sensed wasn't the anger of a trapped spirit. It was its nature. Mrs. Rydal did everything she could to suppress the evil inside her son, Mr. Lawrence continued, the cigarette in his hand now nearly burnt out. "She used charms, rituals. But it only grew stronger. Bringing Julian to the sanatorium was her last resort. She hoped modern medicine, with its drugs and strong walls, could contain it. But she was wrong. And the music box? That wasn't a toy, Mr. Lawrence said, his tone resolute. It was the final cage, the most elaborate prison Mrs. Rydell created with all her knowledge. She used a piece of her own soul to enchant it. The first melody, that mournful one you heard, that was her lullaby, an incantation to keep the demon inside asleep. The lock you opened was the final seal. She gave it to Julian, hoping it would help her son fight the evil within. But in the end, it won. Julian's death. The file said the cause was undetermined. They found him in the Black Rose Garden. No wounds, no signs of poisoning. He was just lying there, with a contented smile on his face. And in his hand was the music box. After Julian's death, Mrs. Rydell also disappeared. No one knows where she went. All we know is that from then on, ghostly things started happening at the sanatorium. They say Mrs. Rydell's spirit stayed behind, not for revenge, but to guard her prison, to keep the demon from escaping. Now everything was clear. Mrs. Rydell's whisper. Her pleading. She was trying to protect him. So what about Mrs. Vance? Caleb asked. Why would she want to release it? Mr. Lawrence snuffed out the cigarette on the sole of his shoe. The Vance family curse isn't being haunted. The curse is the duty to guard that box. Each generation must ensure it remains safe and sealed. It's a burden. Perhaps Mrs. Vance grew tired. Or perhaps, she believed in a different, darker legend. That if you release the entity and submit to it, it will grant you wealth, power, or even immortality. She doesn't want to be a warden anymore. She wants to be a master. A shudder ran down Caleb's spine. He was just a pawn in a terrifying game he never knew he was playing. He had been tricked into performing a summoning ritual. By playing that full melody, Mr. Lawrence said, looking Caleb straight in the eye, you didn't just open a box. You called its name. You gave it power. And you created a bond with it. Now, it sees you as its liberator. It will not let you go. Mr. Lawrence's words were like a death sentence. Any fragile hope that completing the box would solve the problem was shattered. He had made things 100 times worse. So what do I do now? Caleb asked, his voice desperate. How do I end this? Mr. Lawrence was silent for a long moment, looking toward the desolate sanatorium where secrets still slept. You started it, so you have to end it, he said. You have to seal it again. But I don't know Mrs. Rydell's magic. I'm just an old gardener. But maybe the answer is still in there somewhere. In the things she left behind. Mr. Lawrence stood up, brushing the dust from his trousers. Be careful, young man. You're no longer dealing with a ghost. You're dealing with something much, much older. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Caleb alone with the horrifying truth and a nearly impossible task. He had to return to the basement, face the demon he had unleashed. And he had to find a way to learn a form of magic he never believed existed, to save his own life and soul. The truth Mr. Lawrence revealed was like a bucket of ice water to the face, shattering every illusion and fragile hope. Caleb was no savior, nor was he an accidental victim. He was the tool, the one who had pulled the pin on a supernatural grenade. Now, he couldn't run or leave it to someone else. The weight of responsibility, a painfully familiar feeling from his past, settled on his shoulders once more. But this time, it wasn't just guilt. It was a mission. He had to return to the basement workshop. The decision didn't come easily. His entire body rebelled at the thought. The image of the glowing eyes in the dark and the ice-cold hand still haunted him. But he knew the basement was both the lion's den and the only place that held the answers. The music box was there. And if Mr. Lawrence was right, the clues to sealing it again might also be there, among the things Mrs. Rydell had left behind. Before going back, Caleb prepared. He couldn't face the darkness empty-handed. He went to an electronics store and bought several high-powered flashlights, spare batteries, a long extension cord, and a few high-wattage light bulbs. He would turn that basement into a place with no shadows. He also bought salt. A lot of salt. A superstitious thought, perhaps from horror movies he'd seen, flashed through his mind, but at this point, he was willing to try anything. As dusk began to fall, painting the clouds over Sylvan Crest crimson, Caleb stood before the door to his workshop. The wooden door he had broken was still ajar, revealing a pitch-black, deathly void within. He took a deep breath, and the smell of mildew and something sickeningly sweet and rotten filled his nostrils. The smell of roses. He switched on the largest flashlight, its powerful beam cutting through the interior. The basement was a wreck. His tools were scattered across the floor. The drop cloths had been torn down. But the music box was still there, on the workbench, its reassembled metal mechanism gleaming menacingly in the flashlight's beam. It seemed to be waiting for him. Caleb stepped cautiously inside, his feet crunching on the screws and the salt he had sprinkled from the doorway. He didn't hear the giggling, nor did he feel the distinct presence from the night before. But the air was heavy, oppressive, as if an invisible pressure was weighing down on him. Perhaps it was playing a game of cat and mouse. The first thing he did was light the place up. He connected the extension cord, screwed in the bulbs, and turned the basement into a brightly lit stage. He sprinkled salt in a large circle around his workbench, a fragile defensive perimeter. Only then did he dare to approach the music box. He didn't touch it. He just observed. With the eye of a restorer, he searched for details he had previously missed. He realized that the carved climbing roses on the box's exterior were not all the same. They seemed to tell a story. On one side, the roses were still buds, reaching upward strongly. But as he moved to the other sides, they bloomed, then withered, and finally became dry, thorny branches. It was a life cycle. Or a process of decay. He remembered Mr. Lawrence's words, that Mrs. Rydell had used a piece of her own soul to enchant the box. Perhaps she hadn't just left behind a cage. She had left a diary, a coded manual. Caleb began to examine the box more meticulously than ever before. He measured, compared, tapped gently on the wooden surfaces to test the sound. And then he found it. On the bottom of the box, which he had thought was smooth, was in fact not smooth at all. Under the bright light and viewed from a certain angle, he saw extremely fine, almost invisible engravings. It wasn't writing. It was strange symbols, sigils he had never seen before. They were carved in a spiral, converging at a single point in the center. And in that center, there was a detail he hadn't noticed before. A small square piece of ebony, no bigger than his thumbnail, with a slightly different color from the rest, as if it had been fitted in later. A secret compartment. Caleb's heart pounded. This was it. This could be what he was looking for. But to open it, he had to touch the box. He had to step inside his salt circle. He hesitated for a moment. The ticking of the grandfather clock in Mrs. Vance's villa seemed to echo in his head, counting down the time. He took a deep breath, crossed the salt line, and sat down at his workbench. He put on his gloves and picked up a carving knife with a very thin, sharp point. He gently inserted the tip of the knife into the almost non-existent seam of the square piece of wood. He pried it up carefully. The wooden piece popped out, revealing a small hollow underneath. Inside, there were no charms or magical artifacts as he might have imagined. There were only three things. A lock of black hair, tied with a faded red thread. A dried black rose, its petals as thin as paper but still holding their shape. And a small portrait photograph, yellowed with time. Caleb carefully used tweezers to remove each item. The lock of hair was surely Julian's. The black rose came from the sanatorium's ghostly garden. He picked up the photograph. It was a picture of Mrs. Rydall and the boy, Julian. Mrs. Rydall was young in the photo, with a strong, dignified beauty, but her eyes were sad. She held her son in her arms. The boy Julian looked to be about 5 or 6, with a bright, intelligent face. He was smiling, an innocent smile. But there was one gruesome detail. The boy's eyes in the photograph had been scratched out by someone using a sharp object, leaving 2 black, gaping holes. Mrs. Rydall had done this. Why? To hide something in her son's eyes? Or to blind the demon within him? As Caleb was lost in thought, he didn't notice the temperature in the basement dropping suddenly. His breath began to form white clouds. The lights he had just installed started to flicker. They were flashing in a rhythm. The rhythm of the maddening melody. Caleb's head snapped up. He was no longer in his workshop. He was standing in the grand hall of the Black Rose Sanatorium. The dust and cobwebs were gone. The floor was polished to a shine. Crystal chandeliers cast a brilliant light. There was the sound of gentle classical music and the cheerful chatter of people. Couples in 1970s attire were dancing. An illusion. A memory of the building. Mrs. Rydall, in a dark purple long dress, stood at the foot of the staircase, her anxious eyes scanning the room. She was looking for someone. Then she saw him. In a corner of the room, near a large potted plant, the boy Julian stood alone. He wasn't watching the dancers. He was staring intently at something in the air that only he could see. And he was smiling. It was not the innocent smile from the photograph. It was cold, cunning, and full of the promise of imminent cruelty. A waiter carrying a tray of drinks walked past. Julian suddenly stuck out his foot. The waiter tripped, and the entire tray of glasses crashed to the floor, shattering. The music stopped. Everyone turned to look. Mrs. Rydall rushed over, grabbing her son's arm. "Julian, what did you do?" The boy looked at his mother, the smile vanished, replaced by a look of bewildered innocence. "I didn't do anything, Mommy. He fell all by himself." But Caleb, standing there like an invisible ghost, had seen it all. He had seen the flash of malice in Julian's eyes just before he stuck his foot out. The illusion vanished. Caleb was back in the workshop. The lights were still flickering. But now he heard the familiar giggle. It was in the room with him, very close. "You see?" Julian's voice said, not coming from any particular spot but seeming to envelop the entire space. "Mother never trusted me. She always thought I was the bad one." The tools on Caleb's workbench began to vibrate. The music box slammed shut on its own. "She loved this prison more than she loved me," the voice grew angry. "She locked me up. But you freed me. You're better than she is." The salt circle around Caleb's table was suddenly blown apart by an invisible force, salt scattering across the room. His defensive barrier was broken. "Come play with me," the voice became childish again, but with a demonic insistence. "We'll have so much fun." A chisel on the table shot up, aiming straight for Caleb's eye. Caleb reacted on pure instinct. He threw himself backward, chair and all, as the sharp chisel flew past his face, embedding itself deep into the wooden wall behind him with a sickening thud. He crashed to the floor amid the splintered remains of the chair. The searing pain in his back was nothing compared to the terror strangling his heart. The defensive barrier was gone. The entity was no longer probing or playing psychological games. It was attacking. "Fun, isn't it?" The giggle echoed again, this time from directly above him. A host of other tools from the workbench levitated into the air, hovering like a swarm of deadly, metallic hornets. Pliers, hammers, carving knives. All pointed their sharp ends at Caleb. "I'm tired of hide and seek. I want to play a new game now." Caleb scrambled backward, desperately searching for something to defend himself with. His eyes swept over the mess on the floor and landed on the 3 small items he had just taken from the secret compartment: the lock of hair, the dried rose, and the photograph. There was no time to think. He snatched the photo of Mrs. Rydell and her son. In a moment of sheer desperation, he held it up in front of him, like a flimsy shield against the invisible wrath. "Here's your mother," he yelled, his voice cracking. "Look! This is the one who locked you away." A sudden silence fell over the room. The levitating tools froze in midair. The laughter died. "Mother." Julian's voice whispered, no longer malicious, but filled with a surprised confusion. The temperature in the room seemed to rise a degree. The lights stopped flickering. It was working. The image of the mother, the jailer, seemed to hold some power over it. "She didn't love you," Caleb pressed on, realizing he'd found a weakness. He struggled to his feet, his legs still trembling. "She was afraid of you. She scratched out your eyes in the photo so you couldn't see this world anymore." "Liar!" Julian's voice screamed, filled with pain and fury. "Mother loved me. She just wanted to protect me." "Protect you? Or protect the world from you?" A powerful gust of wind swept through the room, sending everything flying. Caleb's notes scattered like fallen leaves. The music box slid across the table, crashing against the wall. But the metal tools didn't attack him. They fell to the floor with a loud clatter. Caleb realized something crucial. This entity, as evil as it was, still carried the memories and emotions of the boy Julian. It longed for its mother's love while simultaneously hating her for imprisoning it. It was an internal conflict, a crack in its malevolent facade. And that was Caleb's chance. He needed to understand Mrs. Rydell. He needed to know what she did, and how. The solution wasn't a direct confrontation with Julian. The solution was in the relics she left behind. He cautiously approached the workbench, still holding the photo like a talisman. He looked at the lock of hair tied with red thread and the withered black rose. These weren't keepsakes. They were components. Components of a ritual. A wild thought occurred to Caleb. He was a restorer. He worked with materials, understood their structure and how they interacted. Magic, perhaps, was just an ancient science, following its own set of laws. Mrs. Rydell was an artisan, just like him. She had crafted a cage. Now, he had to learn how to restore that cage. He needed more information. The folder Mrs. Vance had given him, he hadn't trusted it, but perhaps amidst the lies there were some useful details. He had to cross-reference it with what Mr. Lawrence had told him and what he had discovered himself. "Do you want to know why she did it?" Caleb said, his voice calmer now. He was talking to the demon, trying to buy time. "Maybe the truth isn't what you think." There was no reply. But Caleb felt its presence was still there, listening, curious. He carefully gathered the items from the table, placing them in a small box. He had to leave, go somewhere safer to study them. He decided to return to his rented room. At least there, he could lock the door and hope the presence of other people in the building would somehow diminish its power. As he picked up the music box, a biting cold seeped through his gloves. He looked down. The rose patterns on the box seemed to darken, their thorns appearing sharper. The container and the contained were interacting with each other, and with him. He left the basement, not forgetting his flashlights. He didn't dare look back. He had a feeling that if he did, he would see the silhouette of a small child standing in the doorway, waving at him with a mischievous grin. Back in his room, Caleb bolted the door, even wedging a chair under the knob. He knew these physical defenses were almost useless against a supernatural force, but they provided a false sense of security, just enough for him to concentrate. He spread everything he had on the small wooden table, the patient file from the sanatorium, Mrs. Vance's family documents, and the 3 relics from the music box's secret compartment. He sat there, under the dim yellow light, in the silence of the 4 walls, and began the work of a reluctant detective. He reread everything, comparing every detail, searching for contradictions and hidden truths. Mrs. Vance's documents portrayed Mrs. Rydell as a grief-stricken, desperate mother who turned to religion and ancient beliefs after modern medicine failed. It referred to the music box as a calming object that helped soothe Julian. There was no mention of Mrs. Rydell being a shaman or the true nature of the box. It was a whitewashed version of the story. But one detail in the family tree caught Caleb's attention. Mrs. Vance's full name was Eleanor Vance. She was Julian's cousin, once removed. The family had a secondary branch, and Mrs. Vance belonged to it. By rights, she was not the direct heir to the box. The heir should have been someone else, but that person had died long ago in an accident. This reinforced Mr. Lawrence's theory. Mrs. Vance was trying to seize something that didn't belong to her. Caleb laid the relics out before him. The lock of hair, the rose, the photograph. He stared at the picture, at Julian's scratched-out eyes. Why the eyes? The eyes are the windows to the soul. Perhaps Mrs. Rydell believed the demon had entered her son through his eyes, or that it resided there. By destroying the eyes on a representative object, she was trying to weaken it in the real world. And the black rose? Mr. Lawrence said it fed on sorrow to survive. It was a symbol of decay, of death. In many ancient cultures, flowers were used as conduits to transfer energy or spirits. And the lock of hair, tied with a red thread. Hair is a part of the body, containing DNA, and in many beliefs, a part of a person's essence. The red thread, in Eastern cultures, is often used for binding or connecting. The components were here. But what was the formula? How was the ritual performed? Caleb was desperate. He was a restorer, not a sorcerer. He glanced at the music box sitting in the corner of the room. He needed to examine it even more closely. He brought it to the table, shining his flashlight on the metal mechanism. He had reassembled it, but it wasn't finished. He hadn't oiled it, polished it, or tuned the teeth. He noticed that the pinned cylinder, aside from the 2 separate melodies, had tiny symbols engraved between the rows of pins. They were similar to the symbols on the bottom of the box. This wasn't just a musical score. It was a cipher machine. Caleb used his phone to photograph all the symbols, both on the cylinder and the bottom of the box. He began to compare them, trying to find a pattern. He drew them on paper, rotating them in different directions. After hours of straining his eyes, he saw it. The symbols on the bottom of the box were an alphabet, a key. And the symbols on the cylinder were the message. The melody wasn't just sound, it was the order in which to read the symbols. The mother's mournful lullaby corresponded to one sequence of symbols. And the demon's frenzied tune corresponded to another. He began to decipher, replacing each symbol with its corresponding letter. His heart beat faster. Words started to emerge. The mother's message, tied to the lullaby, child's hair, flower of sorrow, image's eyes. With my blood as ink. With silence as a name. Sing the lullaby again. Lock it back to its old place. Her blood? Caleb shuddered. With silence as a name. What did that mean? He continued deciphering the demon's message, the one tied to the chaotic melody. It wasn't a complete sentence. It was a name, repeated over and over. An ancient name that sounded like the hissing of a serpent. Asmodeus. 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 It wasn't Julian's spirit. Julian was just the vessel. The thing inside him was an ancient demon, an entity recorded in many theological texts, a demon of lust and destruction. Mrs. Vance hadn't just freed a family spirit. She had unleashed an archdemon. Sing the lullaby again. Lock it back to its old place. The old place was the music box. Caleb had to perform Mrs. Rydall's ritual. He had the components, hair, flower. He had the formula, use blood as ink to redraw the ceiling sigils on the photo with the destroyed eyes. But what did with silence as a name mean? And most importantly, where could he get Mrs. Rydall's blood? She had been gone for decades. A feeling of helplessness washed over Caleb. He had found the method but lacked the most crucial ingredient. Just then, he heard a knock at the door. The knock was gentle, deliberate. Not Julian's destructive style. Caleb held his breath. "Who is it?" he asked, his voice trembling. "It's me, Mr. Caleb." Mr. Lawrence's voice came from outside. "Can you let me in? I have something for you." Caleb hesitated. But he trusted Mr. Lawrence. He slowly moved the chair and unlocked the door. Mr. Lawrence stood there, his face grim. In his hands was a small, plain, uncarved wooden box. "After we talked, I went home and looked through my father's old things," Mr. Lawrence said. "Before he passed, my father gave me this box. He said that one night, Mrs. Rydall came to him, gave him the box, and told him to only give it to the person who asked about her son's story and knew of the music box. She said that person would be the successor. I've kept it for decades. Now I know, it's for you." Mr. Lawrence handed the box to Caleb. Caleb's hands trembled as he took it. He opened the lid. Inside, resting on a piece of white linen, was a small knife with a bone handle and a small, dark glass vial. Inside the vial was a dark brown, almost completely dried liquid. Mrs. Rydall's blood. She knew, Caleb whispered, a mixture of awe and fear rising in him. She knew the seal would be broken one day. She was prepared. "There's one more thing," Mr. Lawrence said, looking Caleb directly in the eye. "My father told me what Mrs. Rydall said. Silence doesn't mean the absence of sound. It was her true name. Her legal name was Alara Rydal. But her birth name, the one her parents gave her, was Silence. When you perform the ritual, you must use her blood, draw the sigil, and call her by her true name. Only then can her spirit aid you. The final mystery was solved. Caleb now had everything. The formula, the components, and the sacrifice of a mother who had come decades before him. "Thank you," Caleb said, his voice sincere. "Don't thank me," Mr. Lawrence shook his head. "Save yourself, and don't let that demon bring ruin to this city. Now, you must act quickly. I feel that something terrible is about to happen." Just as Mr. Lawrence finished speaking, Caleb's phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Is this Mr. Caleb?" Mrs. Vance's voice came through, but it was no longer elegant and refined. It was frantic, broken. "Help. Help me. It's here. It's not listening to me. It said it wants a new vessel. A more perfect one." A blood-curdling scream erupted from the other end of the line, followed by the sound of crashing and Julian's horrifying giggle. Then the line went dead. Caleb and Mr. Lawrence looked at each other, their faces drained of all color. The demon had gone to Mrs. Vance. And it was on its way to find a new vessel. Caleb. The storm hit Sylvan Crest at midnight, as if nature itself were screaming at the rise of this evil. Rain lashed against the window panes like pebbles. The wind howled through the pines, creating a mournful sound like 1,000 weeping souls. Lightning flashed incessantly, each strike illuminating the chaos outside and turning Caleb's small room into a stage of flickering light and shadow. This was the night. The night of the final confrontation. Caleb knew he couldn't wait any longer. The demon, after dealing with Mrs. Vance, would surely come for him. He couldn't perform the ritual here, in this cramped, unsafe space. He had to return to the place where it all began, and where it all had to end. The workshop. "You should go home," Caleb told Mr. Lawrence, his voice firm. "This is too dangerous. I don't want to involve you." "No," Mr. Lawrence replied, his eyes resolute. "Mrs. Rydal trusted my father and me. I can't leave you alone. I don't know magic, but I can keep watch. At the very least, if something happens to you, someone will know to warn others." Caleb looked at the old man, a wave of gratitude washing over him. He was no longer alone. They braved the rain, moving through the stormy night back to the workshop. The wind was strong enough to nearly knock them over. When they arrived, they found the basement door wide open, slamming against the wall with each gust of wind. Inside, the air was frigid and thick with the smell of ozone from the lightning and the overwhelming stench of rotting roses. This time, Caleb didn't need a light. The constant flashes from outside were enough to illuminate a horrifying scene. Everything in the workshop had been destroyed. The antique furniture Caleb had been restoring for other clients was smashed to pieces. The walls were covered in deep scratch marks. And in the center of the room, the music box lay wide open, like a mouth laughing in mockery. "It knew we would be back," Mr. Lawrence whispered, clutching the small hoe he always carried. "Then let's not keep it waiting," Caleb said. He stepped inside, placing the wooden box with the ritual items on the workbench, the only thing that was strangely untouched. He began to arrange the items. The photograph of Mrs. Rydal and her son. Julian's lock of hair. The black rose. The vial of dried blood and the bone-handled knife. "I need time," Caleb said to Mr. Lawrence. "Please watch the door for me." If you see anything, shout." Mr. Lawrence nodded, positioning himself as a guard at the doorway, his determined gaze fixed on the darkness. Caleb began his work. Using the bone-handled knife, he carefully scraped some of the dried blood from the vial onto a small porcelain dish. He used a drop of clean rainwater he had collected to dissolve it, creating a brownish-red ink. The metallic scent of old blood rose up. He dipped the tip of a very fine brush into the blood ink. His hand was shaking. He was preparing to inscribe the sigils he had deciphered. He started with the photograph. He needed to paint the sealing sigil onto it. He looked at the symbols on his paper, trying to copy each stroke exactly. Just then, he heard singing. A clear, sad female voice, humming a wordless tune. The melody of the lullaby. The singing seemed to come from everywhere, soft and comforting. Caleb looked up, scanning the room. He saw a faint, shimmering silhouette materializing in the corner. A woman in a dark purple long dress. Mrs. Rydell. Her spirit had come to help him. She didn't look at him, her eyes were fixed on the music box, her expression a mixture of pain and determination. Her presence calmed Caleb. He was no longer trembling. He continued to draw, his lines becoming steady and precise. Just as he finished the sigil on the photograph, Julian's giggle rang out, drowning out Mrs. Rydell's singing. "Mother always takes the side of strangers." The basement door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping the three of them inside. The air turned ice cold. "You can't save him," Julian's voice shrieked. A pitch-black shadow in the shape of a child slowly emerged from the dark corner opposite Mrs. Rydell. The shadow had no face, but Caleb could feel an infinite hatred radiating from it. "He called my name. He belongs to me." The shadow lunged toward Caleb. Mrs. Rydell's spirit instantly moved to intercept it, blocking him with her arms outstretched. The shadow collided with her, creating a sound like an electrical short. Both figures flickered and dimmed. "Hurry!" Mrs. Rydell's voice echoed in Caleb's mind, urgent. "I can't hold it for long." Caleb knew he didn't have much time. He had to complete the ritual. According to the formula, he had to place the lock of hair and the rose on the sigil-marked photograph. Then, place everything inside the music box. He hurried to do so. He placed the lock of hair and the rose onto the photo. But as he was about to put them in the box, he paused. With silence as a name. He had to call her by her true name. It was the key to empowering the ritual. "Silence!" he shouted. "Please, help me." The moment the name was spoken, Mrs. Rydell's spirit began to glow brightly, pushing Julian's dark shadow back. A powerful wave of energy radiated from her, flowing into the items in Caleb's hands. Caleb felt the power. He quickly placed the photograph and the other two items inside the music box. Now for the final step. Sing the lullaby again. Lock it back to its old place. He had to close the lid and turn the crank, playing Mrs. Rydell's tune. He placed his hand on the lid. But Julian's shadow, though weakened, had not given up. It transformed into a black vortex, rushing forward and wrapping around Caleb's arm, trying to stop him. A bone-deep cold, draining the life from him, shot through his arm. His skin began to turn pale. "No! You are mine, Caleb!" Mr. Lawrence yelled, bringing his hoe down hard on the black shadow. The tool passed right through it, but it caused the shadow to falter. Caleb gritted his teeth, using every last bit of his physical and mental strength to slam the lid of the box shut. He scrambled for the crank. The black vortex shrieked, trying to pull his hand away. But Mrs. Rydall's spirit glowed again, her light enveloping Caleb in a fragile shield. He began to turn. The familiar lullaby rang out, but this time it was no longer mournful. It was powerful, majestic, like a hymn banishing evil. With each note, Julian's shadow let out a pained shriek, and the vortex around Caleb's arm weakened. He had to finish the song. The entire room shook. Cracks appeared in the walls. Objects flew about. Caleb kept turning, murmuring the melody, focusing all his will into it. He felt Mrs. Rydall's spirit singing with him, her voice blending with the music, creating an irresistible force. As the final note of the lullaby sounded, a blinding white light erupted from the music box, engulfing Julian's dark shadow. A final, desperate, and indignant scream echoed and then fell silent. Everything plunged into silence. The storm outside suddenly stopped. The wind died. The rain ceased. Caleb collapsed to the floor, panting, completely exhausted. His arm was numb, but the deathly chill was gone. Mrs. Rydall's spirit slowly faded. Before disappearing completely, she turned to look at Caleb. He heard no voice, but he read a silent thank you on her lips. And then, she smiled her first peaceful smile and dissolved into tiny motes of light that floated up and vanished into the air. She was at peace. In the ruined workshop, only Caleb and Mr. Lawrence remained, with the music box lying silently on the table. It no longer exuded a menacing aura. It was just an old, quiet wooden object. It was over. The dawn in Sylvan Crest after the storm was unusually beautiful. The sky was clear, without a single cloud. The air was fresh and pure. Caleb hadn't slept. He sat in the hastily tidied workshop, staring at the music box. He had won. But the cost was not small. His client's items were destroyed. He would have to face legal troubles and compensation claims. But none of that mattered anymore. He had faced the demon inside another, and in doing so, he had, in some way, faced the demon of guilt within himself. The fire from all those years ago would never disappear, but now, he knew he could live with it. Mr. Lawrence arrived in the morning with hot coffee and bread. The two men sat in silence for a long time. "What will you do with it?" Mr. Lawrence asked, nodding toward the music box. "I'm going to finish the restoration," Caleb replied. "But not in Mrs. Vance's way. I will restore it to how Mrs. Rydall intended it. A perfect cage. Then I will seal it. Permanently." A few days later, Mrs. Vance was found deceased in Serenity Manor. The official cause of death was listed as a sudden heart attack. No one found any signs of a break-in or a struggle. The mansion and her entire estate were transferred to a charitable foundation, as stipulated in a pre-written will. The curse of the Vance family, in a way, had ended. Caleb stayed in Sylvan Crest for 2 more weeks. He meticulously restored the music box. He filled every crack, polished every metal component. He did not replace the missing figurine, leaving the space empty as a sign of respect for the tragedy that had occurred. When he was finished, the box looked beautiful in a solemn way. He didn't perform the ritual again. He simply used a special adhesive to glue the lid shut. Then he engraved Mrs. Rydall's sigils onto a small silver plate and affixed it to the bottom of the box. No one would ever be able to open it again. On the day he left Sylvan Crest, Caleb did not take the music box with him. He and Mr. Lawrence went up to the abandoned sanatorium. They went to the Black Rose Garden, which had long since withered away. In a corner of the garden, beneath an old pine tree, they dug a deep hole. Caleb gently placed the music box inside. "Rest in peace," he whispered to both Julian and Mrs. Rydell. They filled the hole, leaving no trace. The secret of the Black Rose and the music box would be forever buried beneath the earth of the foggy city. Caleb left, leaving Sylvan Crest, its ghosts, and its curses behind him. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. Sometimes, on quiet nights, if he listened very carefully, he could still faintly hear it, a sad, lulling melody, a reminder of the fragile line between light and darkness, between restoration and destruction, and of the terrifying power of love and hate. Underscore 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 underscore. The story ends here. Thank you for your interest and for listening to our channel stories. Please support the channel by like the video if you enjoyed it. Comment with your thoughts on the story and its ending. Share this video with your friends and family. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next thrilling horror story. Thank you all for your support.